Hello, pup parents, and welcome to today's episode of the Perfect Pup Podcast. My name is Devin. I'm very excited for today's episode. We have an awesome guest on. We have Amber Aquart with us. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
And we've got River as well. For those on video, this is Amber's cat, River. He's joining us, and
He just wanted to make an appearance.
So before we dive into who Amber is and we give you a little overview of her, the topic that we're going to be covering today is just a really kind of overview of separation anxiety. We'll talk a little bit maybe about crate training as well, just in how it ties into separation anxiety. But this is a topic that is unfortunately I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, but it's only becoming more and more, I guess popular is a wrong word, but it's becoming something more of a challenge for people because of COVID and people working from home and getting puppies or their dogs used to them being home all the time. And now we're finally kind of starting to transition out of like the stay-at-home protocols, and dogs are dealing with separation anxiety. So I assume a lot of you listening might have some of these challenges. So we're going to dive into all of that. But before, let me give you an overview of who Amber is. You've probably seen her. We've done a lot with her on social. She has courses in Pupford Academy. She teaches the trick training courses, crate training, separation anxiety. We've done a lot with her. So just an overview so you know who she is. She is a CPDT-KA certified animal trainer, certified trick dog instructor, and pet lifestyle expert. She started her career as an exotic animal handler and trainer back in 2007 and has been professionally training dogs since 2011. And although her primary focus has been training dogs, she dedicates a special part of her focus on working with training cats as well and integrating multi-pet households and enriching the lives of cats and dogs, which we were chatting about just before we started recording. You know, the cat side of things, we don't do anything with cats here at Pupford, but I still find it so interesting. Amber we were chatting earlier, 3 dogs, 2 cats, 1 husband, and hopefully you've followed her on social already, because I love like the picture, like the videos of the cats and stuff. I'm a dog person like through and through, but just seeing like interactions with cats is amazing to me. And in Amber's words, she said her ultimate goal is to help people develop the best relationship possible with their pets and to be able to have the best life with your best friend. So I know that was kind of a lot. Any fun facts or anything I missed that you want to add in there? I got the right number of pets, right?
Oh, yes, you did get the right number of pets. I think a fun fact is I used to have a pet skunk. I used to have so many pets that were all exotic animals, but now I work with domestic animals, so I don't have any exotic animal pets anymore. But so 3 dogs and 2 cats is plenty for me right now.
Did you train your skunk?
I did, yeah. He wasn't like fancy trick trained, but he could do like a sit pretty. He could spin and high five. You don't see skunks doing that ever, so that was pretty fun.
Yeah, I mean, usually, especially dog people, when they see skunks, they run away because they don't want their dog to get skunked. But like, amazing that you can train any animal, right?
Yep, you could train a goldfish if you wanted to.
I love it. So let's dive into this, because this is kind of one of your bread and butter topics of separation anxiety. Like I mentioned, you've done the full course with us. It's in Pupford Academy. You know, people can get full access to that via Pupford Academy. But we just want to kind of go through and give a general overview for people, because, you know, we discussed, and for listeners, you know, separation anxiety, I'm going to say this first and foremost, and you'll probably reiterate this. Separation anxiety is a very complex topic that often, in many cases, you're going to need the help of an expert. So want to kind of give that disclaimer first, but let's dive into it. For our dogs, what is separation anxiety?
It's such a loaded question. What is separation anxiety? And I think the best way to start describing what separation anxiety is to describe what it's not. So many people think if their dog cries when they are separated from them, or they don't like to be in a crate, that their dog has separation anxiety. And that's not necessarily the case. And that's something that in the separation anxiety course, we get really deep into determining if your dog actually has separation anxiety or if something else is going on. But separation anxiety is technically like a panic disorder. So your dog is an extreme anxious state of mind. It's similar to someone having a panic attack when they're dealing with separation anxiety. And so if your dog seems to just want to be with you and doesn't like to be separated from you, it might not necessarily be separation anxiety, but there's lots of ways to determine what separation anxiety actually is. One of the ways that we determine that is we learn how to read the dog's body language. Is the dog missing you by urinating on the floor, destroying your house and barking all day? Because that could be a sign of separation anxiety. But if your dog is just barking for a few minutes, or they're just destroying things that are laying around the house, that could be something as simple as boredom. So it's really important to make sure that we look at the dog's body language. And we also, in the Pupford course, we evaluate our dogs on camera while we're gone to determine if our dogs actually have separation anxiety.
Yeah, because I was just thinking about that. It's like, well, how can I read my dog's body language if the issue is happening while I'm gone? So can you go just like a little bit more on that? Like, so you set up a camera, leave for 10 minutes, look at your dog and assess. Is that kind of how you go about it?
Yeah, so you definitely want to determine how long does your dog take to get into this panic state of mind. So if your dog is panicking and barking, many people think that their dogs are barking the whole time that they're gone, but they might notice that the dog barks a few times, cries, lays down by the door, or just goes and does their own thing. So a dog with separation anxiety on the camera will usually be persistent about this anxious state of mind for an extended period of time. And that's where you might see some really panicking behavior, such as trying to escape the door, really just destroying walls, destroying couches. That's typically more of that panic state of mind. So we look at the camera to determine, is this dog just missing me? Or is this dog in a panic state of mind where they can't control like where their mind is going?
Hmm. So this next question, it's definitely going to be, like I said at the beginning, this is a very complex topic, and we're not going to be able to dive into the entire thing in a podcast episode, but maybe from like a high level overview. So you talked about how you can use a camera to kind of determine if your dog actually has separation anxiety. So if someone does determine, or if maybe a trainer tells them, your dog does have separation anxiety, what are some of like kind of the first steps, or again, kind of high level, like what do people do? Because it's hard, it's very difficult, especially because it's often associated with things that are problematic. Like, if you're renting an apartment and they're destroying walls, that's a problem. If you're in an apartment building or have close neighbors and your dog's whining and barking the entire day, that's a problem. So how can people approach separation anxiety?
Absolutely. So, like we mentioned, not necessarily all anxiousness when you're gone is separation anxiety. So, your dog might be dealing with something like FOMO, is what I call it, fear of missing out. So, I have a dog that's like this, where when I leave the house, he's fine. But if I lock him in a room, he'll start crying and trying to come out. Granted, we've worked really hard on this. You notice they're not crying or barking right now. So, that's one way that we work on it, is we practice the dogs having positive associations with being separated from us in the house. Now, this is going to help dogs with FOMO, and it's also going to help dogs that have some separation anxiety. So we'll do things like use our favorite chews from Pupford, or use a snuffle mat and put up a baby gate and teach them to eat their favorite chew behind the gate while I'm a few feet away. And this is something that can be really helpful for the dogs to learn that, oh, I don't have to be right next to you to have this really fun thing happen. Now, when we're dealing with a dog who has actual separation anxiety, again, this is something that it's a very loaded topic. So you're definitely going to have to check out the course to kind of figure out what your dog is dealing with. But when we're dealing with a dog that has legitimate, serious separation anxiety, the first thing to do, which you don't want to be told, is you cannot leave your house. Because if we're leaving our house for hours on end and our dog is panicking, it's just reinforcing that state of mind that our dog is in every single time we leave. So the first thing we need to do is set up a plan to be able to make sure our dog is not left alone, whether that be a dog walker, a dog daycare, a friend that can help you out when you need to leave the house. And then what we need to do is we need to establish a baseline of how long it takes our dog to get into that anxious state of mind. So if you leave the house and within 20 seconds your dog is freaking out, then we want to leave the house for 10 seconds, come back before our dogs freak out, so that they learn it was not that big of a deal. It's okay to be left alone. And like I mentioned with the FOMO, we also practice some positive associations with being away from you in the house. And we slowly increase the amount of time that we're able to be away from our dogs, both in the house and when we leave the house.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like it would be quite a process. I don't think it feels like this would not be something that changes overnight. Most things in dog behavior do not change overnight, but I feel like of all the topics or all the behaviors, this one probably is going to take a good amount of time. One question that I didn't prepare you on, so sorry to put you on the spot, but I was just thinking of, a lot of people getting puppies now. What can you do? How do I ask this? So like my dogs don't have separation anxiety. They might have FOMO. Like what can we do preemptively to help avoid them getting separation anxiety? Or is it just something that's kind of baked into their DNA or they're just predisposed to it? Again, that's kind of a complex question, but what?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, but it's a really good question because people want to know, how can I avoid this from happening? Now, some dogs definitely are more predisposed to having separation anxiety. So if your dog's parents had separation anxiety or anxious behaviors or issues that they dealt with, your dog is much more likely to deal with it. Genetics are real and you can't always fight against genetics. The same way a border collie has the instinct to herd things, if your dog parents and its lineage is a little bit more anxious, then certainly they could be prone to it. There are some breeds that I notice that tend to deal with this a little bit more. And it is those working dog breeds. Usually the sporting breeds or the herding breeds tend to deal with these behaviors a little bit more than the others, simply because they've been bred to be so attached to people. And so that can be a great thing, but it can also work against them sometimes when it comes to leaving our dogs. Now, preparing your dog when you have a new dog. So I have a new puppy. Her name is Whiskey. She's super fun, but she has a lot of energy. And so it's really important that we start from the very beginning practicing separations from our dogs. And I think that's why a lot of people during COVID have had a really hard time with separation anxiety, because we haven't been leaving our houses. So, I mean, that might even be like your puppy chews on a bone and you walk out of the house to get the mail and then come back inside. So we want to make sure that we're practicing those separations from our dog in a positive way. So giving them a special treat or a snuffle mat. So we want to make sure we're practicing those positive associations we talked about in a way where our dog never gets into the anxious state of mind. So the first few things you can practice with your dog would be crate training your dog or teaching them to be in a playpen. I have a crate training course on Pupford too. So that's a very great start to teaching your dog how to be okay separated from you. Right now, all three of my dogs are either crated or in their playpen. And the first and most important thing, which we talk about in crate training and in the separation anxiety course, is making sure that our dog's needs are met before we practice separating ourselves from them or from practice this when we're crating them. So my dogs have been on a hike today. They've already gotten a chew. They've already gotten to go to the bathroom. So I know that they don't need anything. So this is the time to practice being separated away from them in the house or leaving the house. So make sure you set aside time to practice this. Don't wait until you actually have to leave when you have a new puppy. We want to practice this and slowly increase the amount of time we can leave our puppy at home.
I love that. That makes sense. And I love that note too. Outside of the world of separation anxiety or crate training, just making sure our dog's needs are met is so important. And I think, we have we have a Facebook community that goes along with our app and some of the courses, and a lot of the things you hear in there or the questions that people have, a lot of the times it's a simple question of, okay, how much physical and mental exercise did your dog get today? On that note though, kind of a nice segue into my last question, which is, what are some of the common myths or misconceptions that you hear about separation anxiety? Because I think for people to know, like, oh, that's actually not true, can help like us as pup parents make better decisions about what our dog's behaviors actually are.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question because this is actually one of the modules in the separation anxiety course. One of the things that people might tell you, or if you search Facebook and Google, guys, before I continue, don't just ask random questions on Facebook and take advice from just anybody. Reach out to people on Pupford, reach out to certified trainers that actually know and have proof of what they're doing. So just saying that because a lot of people will give you advice. You'll hear from someone down the street, oh, just let your dog bark it out. They'll be fine. Just let them sit in their crate and bark and they'll get over it. If your dog is dealing with separation anxiety, they will not get over it. They're in a panic state of mind. So letting them just bark it out is actually increasing their state of panic. So we don't want them to get into that panic state of mind. Another myth that's super common is that corrections will fix separation anxiety, and that's not true at all. If you think about it, if your dog is barking or crying when you leave and then you correct them for it, they're barking and crying because they feel super stressed out and anxious. So if you tell them, knock that off, stop barking and crying, that's not going to help them feel any better. It's only going to increase the way they're feeling. The barking might stop, but you might see that anxious behavior come out in a different way, such as destroying something, eliminating on themselves, or God forbid, chewing on themselves or something like that. And I think another one I like to throw out there that's really important is getting a second dog is not going to help separation anxiety at all. So don't think, oh, my dog needs a friend. That's not how this works at all. You might actually find that if one of your dogs has separation anxiety, that the other one picks up on it as well. So don't get your dog a friend. It's only going to make your life much harder. And that's a huge myth that someone might give you advice, and just don't do it.
Yeah, that's great info. And I've definitely heard every single one of those myths. And like you said, they're usually from random people down the street who I wasn't even asking for their opinion. And so it is super important, like you're saying, to, to get information from reputable sources. And we really didn't do this podcast just to plug the separation anxiety course, but legitimately, like, if you are struggling with this and you need more help, you'll get this was a high level overview. You will get into the weeds and you will really get into all things separation anxiety. So we'll link to that people can go check that out if they're interested or struggling with separation anxiety. One thought too that I thought was interesting that you brought up, just about, if your dog has separation anxiety and you get another dog, that's not going to help them. It's probably, they're just going to pick up on the separation anxiety. I'm going to make a note too. That is true for a lot of behaviors. We got one of our labs when we had an 8. Our other lab was like 7 months old, and we're like, this will be great. They'll play with each other and tire each other out, which they kind of did. But the other one taught the younger one how to pull on a leash, and taught the younger one how to bark at the dogs on the other side of the fence, and taught her how to, chew up shoes. So it's just, I'm glad you made that point, because another dog is not always a solution, and definitely not in separation anxiety.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do want to say that, the reason why the course was brought up so much is because separation anxiety is such a loaded topic that, in a short podcast, there's only so much information that we can give. And I think it's really important that if you're wondering if your dog is dealing with separation anxiety, don't wait until it gets worse, because it will get worse. So if you're not sure if they have it, make sure we're taking some steps in the right direction to address that pretty quickly. If you're not positive if your dog is actually having separation anxiety, get a webcam and just watch them on the camera to see what they do. I cannot advise this enough. Do this before it gets worse. If you think for a second your dog might be dealing with it, the sooner you address it, the easier it will be for both you and your dog. You never want to get to a place where you can't leave your house without your dog barking the entire day. So that's one of my biggest advice for anyone who's dealing with potentially a dog with separation anxiety.
I love it. That is great advice. Face the problem before it potentially gets worse. I love that. So thank you so much, Amber, for coming on. I learned a ton. I also just want to add a note too, that for people who are dealing with separation anxiety, we get it's difficult. If you are struggling, we get it. It is hard. That is why we're doing this podcast. That is why we have the courses. We want to provide as many resources as we can to help you feel like you can overcome these problems. So thank you again, Amber, for coming on and just sharing your expertise on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And just something to say for you guys is, I have a dog that dealt with separation anxiety, and it is something that you can work on and that can be fixed. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, and just be patient and be kind to yourself as well during the process of working through separation anxiety.
I love it. Great advice. And one last little thing, again, we'll put the link to that separation anxiety course if you want to go check it out. For those of you who have left reviews and comments, I sincerely appreciate it. And if you want to leave a review, I look at every single review of this podcast. And if you have ideas for topics, or you want to hear from Amber again, let us know. And we really appreciate the feedback. But other than that, we will catch everybody on the next episode.